All right, so show of hands, who here knows what a low tunnel is already? Okay, and then who here has used low tunnels before? Okay, cool. Awesome. Got some newbies. That's great. So here's where we're going tonight. We're going to demystify and define low tunnels, go through all the terms. There's a lot of different terms for these and ways that people talk about them. You've probably heard lots of different terms, and we'll break them all down and try to make it a little clearer. Talk about what they're for, what are the parts and pieces, how do you install them, what crops are they best for, and then some resources to learn more and to get them going on your land. So, low tunnels. We're using that term. I think it's the simplest way to describe what we're talking about. And I'll go through a couple others here in a minute, but in general, we're talking about structures that are less than 3 or 4 feet tall. So caterpillar tunnels are a little bigger. High tunnels are a whole big structure that is behind Carrie there. She's inside her high tunnel right now.
No, it's just a backdrop photo.
But they typically span 1 or 2 baths, so they're on a much smaller scale than a high tunnel. And wow, my image is going purple. I'm partying over here. They can utilize hoops or they can not utilize hoops. And then the covering, it has to have some kind of covering, and it can be plastic or fabric. So row cover is part of a low tunnel, and it can be used for one of 2 purposes: season extension and warming, or pest control. So we use them for multiple things. Sometimes you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Sometimes you just use them for one of these. And again, they can be used without hoops, and then they're usually called floating row cover at that point. And then the plants just support them on their own. And there's an image there of like some small plants, you know, floating row cover just right on the plants, and they support it, and they're not damaged, they're just fine. So again, caterpillar tunnels we're talking a little bigger, and that's kind of outside of the scope of this presentation. Really similar in a lot of ways, but they're just kind of a different beast. So we're really talking the smaller 1 or 2 rows at a time. So the caterpillar tunnels are kind of a go-between between the high tunnel and the low tunnel, typically larger, taller, but they're not quite as extensive as a high tunnel. So let's see. Carrie, do you have anything to add to these terms?
No, I just think it's interesting. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I just think it's interesting that low tunnels can use the exact same technology as hoop houses in terms of how you anchor them and how you keep them from blowing away in the breeze and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot of crossover in the techniques that we use between a hoop house and a low tunnel. So.
Yeah, so here's a couple of the uses. So season extension and season warming. That's probably, I don't know, they're all super valuable reasons to use low tunnels. But that's a big one, is just that extra warmth that you get. Part of that warmth, though, is also the protection from wind. The asterisk there, I think, is just because wind can complicate your use of low tunnels. If they're not super secure, they can blow away and they can actually cause damage to your plants. So there's the caveat there. Like it helps conserve heat due to wind, like the loss of heat due to the wind, but you do have to be careful using them in windy areas because they can blow away a lot easier than a high tunnel or caterpillar tunnel, something that's a little more permanent structure. Protection from pests. Again, mostly up here, we're talking about root maggots, cabbage root maggots and onion root maggots. Increased humidity can be really valuable for that. And then they're budget friendly and scalable. So, you know, as opposed to using a high tunnel, these are really easy to get started. They're cheap. They're a lot more accessible. So climate control is the first thing we'll talk about. Another term for these is frost cover, and that's exactly what these can be used for. Depending on the thickness, you can get frost protection down to 24 degrees. They increase both the soil and the air temperature. They're really useful at the beginning of the season just to protect baby transplants and seedlings. And then they're useful all season long for warm season crops. Again, wind protection, increased daytime temps. So you might not get as much protection at night from, and especially like early season or late season from temperature, but the increased daytime temp is going to be a lot warmer. And then again, the humidity increase. Little greenhouse. And then protection from pests. So root maggot control, these are just so useful for that. It does need to be used in conjunction with with crop rotation. We'll go into all the details with that, but basically you never want to grow cabbage family crops in the same place that you did the year before, because the pupa of the root maggot flies will be in the soil already. And so if you put row cover over them, they're just going to be trapped right there with your plants and attack them. So you want to rotate away from where you grew them last year and cover them. And then you're excluding the flies from landing on the plants and laying their eggs. I need to do a one-pager on these.
Do we go into that a little bit more later, Monica? I can't remember.
I do have one more slide at the end, so we could go into more detail about it then. Yeah. So types of covers, like I said before, there's lots of different types of covers you can use. Greenhouse plastic would be the option that provides the most warming effect. But you can also buy perforated plastic. So the top right picture has like slits in it, and it comes like from the factory that way. And the purpose of that is so that you don't have to vent it. If you use just straight greenhouse plastic and it gets really hot, you might actually have to open those up a little bit to vent them, or they'll fry your plants. And then that lower left one has some holes in it again to vent, so you don't have to be adjusting it all the time. And then there's mesh, which is the top left. And I don't know very many people in Alaska that use these. A few people, I think down south, like with flea beetles and some of the like thrips and things that we don't have so much here or don't have so many issues with, they use the bug netting, but I don't know many people that use that here. Mostly what I see people use is this permeable cover on the lower right, and it goes by several different terms: Rime, Agrabah, cloche, frost cloth. Got another slide with some more names for it. And then shade cloth is the last one that people could use. We'll talk more about potential uses for that. So types of plastic, you can buy 4 or 6 mil greenhouse plastic. So that's just the thickness. 4 mil is a little bit easier to work with. It's a little more flexible, lighter, cheaper. 6 mil is thicker and gonna last a lot longer. I believe, Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, 6 mil is what your typical high tunnel cover is made out of.
It is. I have some things to say about that though. So I have found, I use both the 6 mil greenhouse grade plastic, and it's usually the stuff that I have left over after one of my pieces rips off in a windstorm or whatever. And you know, these are typically about 10 feet wide, between 6 and 10 feet wide. So obviously you can salvage a lot. But when I use the greenhouse grade 6 mil plastic, I find I have to do a lot more reinforcing to make sure that the rain goes off it well, or that it's really tight stretched from end to end. So I actually really love the reinforced plastic, construction plastic that has fiberglass in it. It's not greenhouse grade, so it doesn't last as long. I think I probably usually get about 5 years out of it, but it's a little bit thinner, so it's easier to tension from end to end, if you can imagine. And it's also easier to slide up on the sides. It doesn't bunch as thickly. So I've had really good success with that. But I haven't used the thinner, which maybe is 4 mil perforated plastic yet, but I'm really curious about that. Anyway, you know, anytime you get rain, if you've got creases, then they fill with water. So that's a factor. And you have to try and mitigate that. So recommend experimentation. It really depends on the length of your low tunnels. I'm dealing with like 50-foot long low tunnels, so it's harder to stretch something that long.
We have a question in the chat, Carrie. What is the reinforced plastic called?
You know,
Brian McCoy put a comment up.
what was it, Charlie?
It's called Durascrim, is one of the trade names, like from SBS. You can get it, Durascrim, over.
Cool. Yeah, that's great to hear. I actually didn't know that. My note on here is that it's important to use agricultural grade plastic because that stuff is actually like UV treated to not break down in the sun. And I've heard that using construction plastic, it can degrade in just like less than one season. Like while it's out there and you're using it, it's breaking down and shattering. But it sounds like that stuff is a little stronger. So hopefully, yeah, sounds like you said you got 5 seasons out of it. That's impressive.
Yeah, definitely. And I trash it as well. You know, it's like drug through the ground and stuff, but definitely I've had that experience with the 6 mil that's not reinforced. Sometimes it is great and lasts several years. Sometimes it shatters in a season, and that's discouraging. So, yep.
We have another very related question about where one can go to buy row cover in Alaska.
Yeah. I think I have a slide at the end, but where is this person located?
I might be able to sleep that out.
Here on the peninsula, Kenai Feed is one of the best suppliers for all of this stuff, really. But Anchor Point Greenhouse also has a selection of row covers, and they sell it by the foot. So they've got big rolls, and you can roll out however much you need and buy it by the foot, which is really nice. Other than that, I'm not sure. I don't know if Wagon Wheel has it.
This questioner was from Palmer, actually.
Okay, Palmer, yeah. I would check the Alaska Farm Supply there. But yeah, pretty much any garden supply store that's significant size should have this stuff. And then I've got some online options at the end here. So, yeah. Okay, so then the other thing about plastic is that if it's not the perforated kind, it does need ventilation. So you'll have to find a way to open it up in the heat of the day. When we have a hot sunny day, you'll want to open it up a little bit to vent out because it can fry your plants for sure. The other thing is it doesn't allow water through. Again, the perforated might allow some water through, but you really want to think about drip irrigation. water, drip lines you can have underneath this stuff and you can water every day and you don't have to be messing with the row cover. If you're hand watering, you've got to open it up, water, close it back up. There's a lot more fiddling with it. So, do you have anything to add on that, Carrie?
No, yeah, definitely would always use irrigation underneath plastic, but with the Agribon or Remay, the frost cloth, it's not necessary. Although I find when you put a new piece of frost cloth down, you're definitely not getting as much water through it. Over the years, it breaks down and then it's better. But I usually irrigate underneath all of this stuff.
Yeah, the other thing that I've read this, I haven't actually experienced it. I plan on buying some of this slitted plastic if I can get my hands on it. I don't know anybody locally that sells it. But that the slits are designed to actually open as the plastic expands and then contract. So it kind of ventilates on its own, which I think is really cool. But I do tend to think these are more single use type things, and I'd like to try to get multiple seasons out of it. So we'll see. Be determined on that. Okay, so then moving on to the next type of covering that you might use with these is lots of different names. Spun woven, I feel like, is the best description of what it actually is, but it's like a cloth fabric. I believe it's plastic. It's actually plastic, but Cloche, Remay, Agribon. Remay and Agribon are the brands that you can buy. But it's basically a woven or spun bonded fabric. It's lightweight and porous, and it ventilates on its own. It allows water through, but like Carrie said, if it's brand new, water might bead off of it a little bit. But in my experience, water goes through it pretty well. Depending on how thick, there's lots of different thicknesses you can buy of this stuff. And depending on how thick it is, it allows less light through. But Carrie, maybe you can offer your 2 cents on this. I don't think that here in Alaska, we have to worry at all about how much light is getting through because we've got enough light. So I don't really pay attention to that. I pay more attention to how thick it is and how much I want to work with it. The Agribon 19 is my favorite all-purpose for using it. I mostly use it for root maggots for my brassicas, but I also use it to germinate my carrots and for some like early season protection of transplants and stuff. And it's lightweight. I believe this picture is the 19. You can kind of see through it almost. And it works great. The 30 and the 70 and 90 get thicker and thicker. It's just a little bit heavier if you're working with really long rows, slightly more expensive, but it also will last a little bit longer. So if you're looking for longevity, you might think about going a little bit thicker with it. And again, cross protection, if you're using it like really early season, the thicker, the better. The other thing is you can double this stuff up. So you can use 2 layers of it if you want. You could get the thinner stuff and use 2 layers, and then you've got a little more cross protection. What do you got, Carrie? Anything to add to this?
Well, I don't know if we talk about this later or not, but the whole issue of laying, some crops can tolerate having it laying on top versus, I guess my general rule of thumb is when seedlings go down, or if I'm germinating something like carrots, I'll leave the Agribon right on the surface for a while, but then there definitely is a point where most crops will prefer to have a little airspace there. And then there's some crops like alliums that, green onions or onions that really suffer having the Agribon on top. I mean, it's fine on a nice day, but if you get a rainstorm and there's some water pooling there, it can do some damage. So I've also seen if the water pools on top of the Agribon, and then the sun shines on top of that, it can actually burn the plants underneath it. That's always a surprise. So you can, because of the magnification factor. So you definitely have some some food for thought to putting hoops over, even if you're planning to just use Agribon.
Yeah, and I don't think I mentioned this, but with plastic, you pretty much always want hoops because if it touches your plants, you're gonna get sunburn right at that contact surface. But yeah, with this smart woven cloth, it's much more lightweight, so you don't always need the hoops. And I do think I've got a slide on some of the crops. You can use it without hoops on. And then this is the insect netting. I just wanted to make you aware that it exists, but again, I don't know many people that use it here. I think it's more expensive than the Agribon, and so it's like, why bother? We don't really need it here.
Yeah, I
So,
think
yeah.
that the reason people use it is because it doesn't hold heat as much as the Agribon does. So that typically isn't an issue for us here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, possibly in a high tunnel, I have had issues in my high tunnel using row cover. Where really it was a weed issue, but it was like the combination of being in the high tunnel and having row cover. My weeds just went crazy and outgrew all of the plants that I had in there. And I mean, they were so weak that they were like dissolving. Like I pulled the row cover back and the stems of my spinach were like, you touched them and it just like fell apart. Because it was like, the weeds did so well in that environment. It was so humid. And then it was just too warm and yeah, stale air, no movement, bad combination. So maybe this insect netting would be nice inside a high tunnel to keep that warming from being an issue. Yeah.
What about if you're trying to grow something that likes a cooler climate like this, spinach and kale and stuff like that?
Yeah.
But you would use this for insects and also as like a deterrent for other little creatures not to munch on it.
Yeah, for sure.
Would it work for that? Would it work to keep like
Rabbits.
I
some
think it would.
animals
I
seem to
mean,
know just when things get ready to be picked, right?
yeah,
And so they're on it just like you are. I'm sure they check it every morning.
yeah.
And they get up earlier than we do traditionally. And so, you know, would that stop like a mouse? Would it stop a rabbit?
I don't think it would.
I mean,
I don't think it would stop them reliably. It
not
might
reliably, no.
distract them for
More
a
really.
minute, but I think they would chew right through it.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah, I'd probably be looking at
so
chicken wire or something.
And the
then
mice
do
like to
we
burrow.
have a lot of insects that attack like the colder climate type of like broccoli and
Yeah,
spinach and, you know, it's where this would make sense, or would remake just solve that anyway, or would remake make it
yeah.
too warm?
That's
For
kind of
those
been
to
my
thrive.
conclusion is that the remake, like, because mostly I'm thinking root maggots on my radishes and my broccoli, cabbages, that kind of thing.
Right,
And they do fine under the remake. And
Okay.
most of those you're growing outside anyways. But I did have that experience in my high tunnel where it was a little too warm, I think. And so in that case, maybe it'd be worth it to try the insect netting instead, but yeah.
okay.
So, one more type of fabrics that you might consider is shade cloth. This is another kind of like untrodden territory. I think Carrie and I have talked about this a lot. Not very many people use this that we're aware of in Alaska, but we think it's kind of promising for bolt-prone crops. Because you're blocking out sunlight, right? So the issue with bok choy and chard and spinach here is that it bolts because we've got so much sunlight. But if you introduced a shade cloth like this, maybe you could solve that problem. So if anybody wants to try it, report back to us. We'd love to hear.
I got a question here.
Yeah.
All right, so I don't know, you know, I've just been trying without talking to people, but one of the things I did was I have a flower bed type of thing, which I guess is like this thing. And I have hoops over it and I have stuff to reinforce concrete sidewalks that go over the hoops so that your
Oh, yeah.
hand can reach through the wire netting.
Yeah,
It's got big enough holes. And so sometimes when it's kind of warm out or whatever, I take an old fishing net that has holes in it, which is dark like this, and I put it over these hoops like that. And I think, it's a strawberry bed. I think actually that it makes the bed feel warmer because of the dark from the net. So it kind of heats it up. And also what it does for me is it's a strawberry bed. It helps keep birds out from eating the berries when I have the net over it. That's where that started. But it seems to warm up the bed. So I hadn't thought of it as cooling the bed really, but maybe it does.
yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. It would, yeah, it'd be interesting to, we've got another Land talk coming up, I don't know when it is, mid-February on mulch, all the different kinds of mulch. And Glenna Gannon actually ran a study where she had temperature loggers at different depths in the soil with different types of mulch fabric on top.
Yeah.
And so she'll be reporting on the results of that. It's very interesting. It would be interesting to try it with these row covers and see what the results are.
Well, also, you know, we were a fishing community, so we could recycle some dummy nets,
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
rather than buy more plastic. This, that's a thought.
That talk on the Great Mulch Study will take place Thursday, March 6th.
Okay, March 6th. Yeah. All right, so moving on to the support hoops. Again, there's quite a few different routes that you can take. Number 9 galvanized wire or number 10 is one of my favorite things to use, but it is very hard to find. I found some at Kenai Feed years ago, and it was pre-cut to 7-foot lengths. And I don't know if they still have it or not. I don't think I've seen it.
You might try looking up brace wire.
Brace
Because
wire.
we use it,
Okay.
that gauge wire is used when you're doing your H braces and your corner braces for fencing. That's what you're using as your tension line
Okay,
with your turnbuckles. That's the term you would look up, is brace wire.
brace wire. So write that down and ask at your feed store, see if you can get it ordered. Kenai Feed is really great about ordering this kind of stuff, so that's one route to go. Anchor Point Greenhouse had some, but it was a little bit thinner. I don't remember the gauge. And I didn't think it was as stable, and Al wasn't pleased with it either, but he said it was all he could get. But that's what that is in the lower right there. So it's kind of stiff wire. It's straight if you're not like actively putting pressure on it. So you can stab it in the ground and then bend it over to the other side of the bed and stab it in the ground. And then it's a nice support that's really lightweight, easy to handle. And you can put your lightweight row cover on that. The next option would be 1/2-inch electrical conduit. And so that's what the pictures on the left are here. And those you have to use a pipe bender if you want it to be neat and tidy. A pipe bender is very useful for that. And we actually have a 3-foot pipe bender with Homer Soil and Water that we'll loan out. So if you're local, you can come sign it out with us. It's free. And it's very useful for creating these hoops. And you can get this 10-foot length electrical conduit at SBS or, you know, any hardware store. So that's probably the sturdiest option. And then the last option would be PVC. That works okay for lighter weight fabric. A lot of people really like to use it, but it does have downsides. I think that it's not nearly as supportive. It tends to collapse and bend and not hold its shape. So, you know, if you really want something that's going to last and hold up to wind and rain and all kinds of weather, the metal, I think, is a better way to go.
Yeah, I would just say that we bent probably at least 300 of these in an afternoon with a couple of us. And you don't have to have a pipe bender. You can make anything out of like piece of plywood. What's that? A plywood jig. My helpful engineer partner is saying, and yeah, you can, all you just have to do is create something that's the shape that you want it to be and then test it out. It takes a little bit of finesse, but once you get it lined out, it's really fast. It's not a difficult process. And the 1/2 inch conduit hoops, they're very sturdy. You can get rain on them and they'll still stand up. Yeah.
So then, you want something to keep your hoops in the ground. The number 9 and number 10 wire can be just stuck right into the ground unless it's really fluffy, freshly tilled, then they might want to spring back out. But if you can get them down into some denser dirt, they'll stick in the ground just fine. Carrie, you stick your conduit into the ground too, don't you? Or do you
Yeah.
slide it onto something?
Yeah, so I used to slide it onto rebar, but then I found that over time the rebar bonded with the conduit, and so you'd have to pull the whole rebar stick out, and that kind of defeated the purpose. So then I now just stick them into the ground about a good foot, and because my beds are not, I know my gardens aren't level, I'm sticking the uphill side in a little further than the downhill side. But generally, if you're going at 4-foot spacings and you've got, they're not going to get wrenched around too much by the wind because you've got good wind bracing, then you're probably going to be fine just sticking them into the ground, depending on how fluffy your soil is. The other thing that I don't think we had in this, and I wish I had a demonstration of it because it's going to be hard to explain, is that especially if you're using the wire hoops that are thinner, if you cross 2 of them over at the end of the row, so they make basically like well, that's just going to be super hard for me to explain. But basically you put one at a 45-degree angle across the row and another one at a 45 degree. So it basically creates like a little dome at each end. Then you can brace against that more than you would with just a single hoop. And then the other thing is setting the hoops at an angle, a 45-degree angle from the edge of the bed, also has the same effect of allowing you to brace with your bunch of plastic or rime or whatever and tether it. That a picture would be much better here.
We'll see. I might have a picture, but I don't think I do that. And then for raised beds, you can use hose clamps and secure them to the side of the raised bed, and that's a really great way as well. But yeah, lots of different options for that.
For really windy areas, like out in Fritz Creek, I can get 80-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah.
How frequent do you pull the spacing in tighter and do every 3 feet? Or do you just go deeper with your support spikes?
Yeah, I would be tempted to try the rebar for that. But bearing in mind that they could rest closed. And then I think 5 feet is the starting point, but probably a little bit closer if you're dealing with a lot of wind. What do you have, Carrie?
I think that the trick to getting the wind issue under control is how you secure your plastic on top. So I've done a zigzag pattern with string. Are there more slides that talk about this? I don't want to get ahead of us, but anyway, if you can secure your plastic to the hoops or keep the wind from getting underneath that plastic, that's really where the wind becomes a problem. I don't think the wind is gonna take the whole hoop up out of the ground. These are so low lying. What's going to happen is it's going to get underneath if things aren't tethered down properly, and then it'll start flapping things up. That's been my experience anyway. And my farm was originally called Windy Manor when I bought it. So
Then weights for the covers, you want to secure the edges of the cover with something. A lot of people use dirt, but in my experience, the dirt just dries out and then the wind blows it all around and you don't have them secure anymore. So I think sandbags are probably the best option. And you can just get sandbags at SBS, and I mean, they're really cheap. And then go to the beach and fill them up with sand. And they're easy to move around because they're tall and you can just bend down. You don't have to like rocks and things. You're always tripping over them and you have to bend all the way down to pick them up and move them around. Sandbags are really nice to handle if you're doing a lot of them. But that said, you can use rocks, you can use 2x4s, you can use pretty much anything you want. It's kind of about like how much does it abrade the cover. I've used some pieces of wood and stuff, and then the wind blows and it kind of wears holes in the Agribon stuff. These pegs and staples work okay. I haven't tried these big plastic ones with the handle. They look a little more secure, but I've used landscape staples and a lot of times they just pull out with the wind. So the
Yep.
sandbags, I think, are the best option.
And they make UV resistant sandbags. Highly recommend that as somebody who's been picking up sandbags and having them completely collapse on you because they've degraded. They also make some awesome, I think Bootstrap Farmer, or it might even be Farmer's Friend, has some, and I think I've even seen them on Amazon now. I know it's a dirty word now, but anyways, these great sandbags that have a beautiful little handle on the end, and they're more tubular. They're like long and skinny, and the ones that I have are green mesh. And anyway, they've got this awesome handle. So if you're going along and picking these up every day to ventilate or whatever, having that handle there is really nice. Another thing to just word to the wise, you don't have to fill the sandbags all the way up. They don't need to be that heavy, and you'll be really happy if they aren't that heavy if you're moving them every day. And the last thing I'm going to say is that for the crops that you're trying to keep root maggots out of, especially salad turnips and radishes, but any turnip really where the root maggot is a really big deal. I have taken to laying rebar down flat on the ground and then putting a couple of sandbags on each end. So you have a continuous tether down to the ground, because if you put a couple sandbags down, I mean, a fly is going to get underneath there. So that's what I do to keep the entire edge covered, much like the dirt would. I think that's why a lot of people put dirt on, but our dirt is typically, pretty fluffy, and it, like she said, it doesn't hold.
We have a question related to this in the chat. If you were using raised beds, what works best to weigh these things down?
Yeah, I think, what was that?
Clamps.
Spring clamps.
Clamps?
Spring
Yeah.
clamps from the hardware store. Home
Yeah.
Depot.
Yeah.
Oh, spring clamps, that's a great idea.
I
Yeah,
use
otherwise,
spring
rocks.
clamps a lot, and I also use them to clamp onto the poles to hold the plastic up to ventilate. But you can also, when you've got a wind event coming, use them at the bottom to just tether everything down. But the other thing is the string. Do we have a slide that talks about the string going back and forth?
I think so. I'm
Yeah.
about to get into kind of like setting these up all the way,
Okay.
and so maybe we'll talk about that when we get there. Also just throwing this out there, if anybody's on a larger scale, people use tractors to set this stuff up too. And Kenai Feed actually has a mulch layer. I am not 100% sure if it also lays row cover, but if you're interested, give them a call and find out, because that would save a lot of time if you're doing many long rows. And the way these work is there's in that red tractor picture, there's a disc that throws dirt over the edges, and I don't know how it works if you want to use support hoops. I think a lot of times they're just putting it right over the plants, but anyways. So just an overview of the crops that are most benefited by cover. So we're talking the root maggots, brassicas, the root crops, mostly turnips, salad turnips, radishes, and then also onions if you have onion root maggots. And again, it has to be used in conjunction with crop rotation. And then low growing warm season crops, I think that this is pretty promising for if you don't have a high tunnel and you want to grow zucchini or very compact winter squash or bush beans. I think you could grow these in a row cover without having a high tunnel, especially in like a raised bed on a smaller scale. Pretty promising. And then just early season, getting a really early start. And this is what Carrie does a lot of, is growing baby greens, lettuce, short season stuff early in the season, as well as late in the season. And then also an earlier start to your longer season crops. I really like using row cover on my beans. I'll direct seed my beans and then put row cover over them for like the first couple weeks and just let them get a start when it's still kind of cool. Like I live at a higher elevation, and so early season when I plant them, it's not always reliably warm enough for them to be happy. So even just the Agribon, even a lightweight of that stuff is really helpful. Protecting transplants when you first put them out, protecting them from wind, hard rain, the elements. And then resilience for cool summers. Like last year, we just didn't get a lot of warmth, even the year before. And so the row cover really gives you that extra heat, that extra boost that we sometimes just don't get here on the peninsula. Okay, so kind of go through how to use this stuff. So utilizing the row cover without hoops, pretty simple. You can just lay it right onto the plants or direct seed, lay it right onto the ground. As long as you leave a little bit of goofiness or slack in the row cover, they will push the plants up. You want to make sure that you're not tightening it straight to the ground, because then they won't have room to grow. And you can adjust it as they grow as well. But that's a really great way to use it. And then, yeah, you can also use it just for germination, like for carrots. For my place, like I don't have a whole lot of water. And so I'll feed my carrots and put that row cover down and actually water on top of the row cover for like the first 10 days while I'm waiting for them to germinate. And then as soon as they come up, I pull that row cover off, and then I'm just using my drip irrigation. So it's really great for that. And then, yeah, most crops will just grow and push it up, but alliums are probably the one that I would be careful with, because they're a little more delicate. I put an asterisk there though, because Carrie and I have both been saying this, and then I ran into somebody who says that they grow alliums without any hoops at all, and he hasn't ever had any problems, but take it with a grain of salt. So setting up your hoops, 7 to ideally 10-foot long hoops will span a 30-inch bed and be about 3 feet off the ground. So I like 10 feet. I think that gives you the most wiggle room for being able to stab it into the ground, enough that it's sturdy. 5-foot spacing is a good starting point, but again, if you're in a really windy location, you might want to shrink that up a little bit. But in my experience, 5 feet is pretty good. And then again, the wire hoops can be stuck into the ground. Conduit can be slid onto rebar or stuck into the ground.
I just remembered somebody in another discussion, maybe the last time we went through this material, was talking about using fiberglass poles to anchor their hoops into the ground. And there you wouldn't have the problem with the rebar corrosion. So these are like the ones you get to put little lights on your driveway. I've seen them at Ulmer's. They're usually orange and they're about maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. And so but you can buy them in bulk as well. They'll be a lot cheaper and they're pretty easy to stick in the ground. Do wear gloves though if you're sticking them in the ground, because nothing is more painful than a fiberglass splinter.
Yeah.
So a point of clarification on your measurements there, so the question is, sorry, row cover is 10 feet wide and 5 feet, question mark?
Oh, 5 feet between your hoops. If that makes sense. So like in this picture of a long row here, you've got your hoops spaced 5 feet apart down the row. And then 10-foot wide row cover. They sell it in shorter or skinnier strips, but I am not a big fan. I've bought skinnier stuff. I think it was like 6 or 7 feet wide. And my crops outgrew it. And then it wasn't like touching the ground anymore. And for root maggots, that's a problem. So I think 10 feet is the best width if you're dealing with like a 30-inch bed.
How long do you have to protect from it?
And the rule of thumb is until July 4th. In my experience, it is getting later and later. So as late into July as you can stand. So the
Question?
simple,
The
Oh.
question, how long to leave to protect them?
How long to protect from root maggots?
Oh, from root maggots, I never take the remay
Never
off
take this cover off.
ever. Nope.
there you go.
Wow.
So yeah, the simple way to set these up, I'm gonna outline a simple way and then a rugged way. So, simply you wanna put your wire hoops down, every 5 feet down your row. And then drape your row cover over that. And then you want to draw it as tightly as possible from end to end and anchor that with a little Tootsie roll at the end. So you've got to leave yourself 10, 15 extra feet and roll it up into a Tootsie. And then you can tie that to some kind of an anchor, a T-post or rebar or a big rock, and tie that thing down and weight it down so that it's not lifted. It'll kind of want to stretch upwards, but you want to anchor it down to the ground. And then secure along the sides with your sandbags or your staples, and then you should be good to go. Carrie, do you have something to add?
Yeah, so if you look at that bottom picture, you see how all the hoops are straight up and down. If you angle that last hoop out at a 45-degree angle instead of having it straight up and down, then you have more hoop to tension against. It's so hard to verbally explain these things. I'm so sorry, but it's better to angle that last hoop out at an angle toward the end of your row. Does that make sense?
Do you mean like by out, do you mean like away from the flower bed toward where it's tied at a 45-degree angle?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. And it's
And then
okay. That means it's a little bit lower than the hoop in front of it. That's all right, but it just gives you more to pull against.
Yeah, and that's where you were saying too, you could make an X if you wanted to do 2, right? But you don't have to.
No, I find if you push it into the ground enough, it works fine that way. But I've seen in experience that it's substantially more resilient if you angle it out. And then I've also seen a lot of other farmers suggesting that. So I was like, oh, yeah, they probably know what they're talking about.
So this is the rugged way. In this case, you probably want to use the 1/2 inch conduit, a little bit sturdier. And, this is where we were talking about the string to secure, to anchor it down from the wind. So you'll put your, and in this case, do you use rebar, Carrie?
I never use rebar anymore, but I'm
Okay.
interested in trying the fiberglass. But I do push, most of my crops are not particularly tall, you know, like I wouldn't have probably enough space in the hoops that I make, hoop houses that I make to, or low tunnels that I make to grow, like, say, a Brussels sprout. They'd be too short for that. They're probably about 3 feet. No, they're probably about 2.5 feet tall. And then I use zip ties personally at the base of the where the hoop goes into the ground, and I'll put 2 zip ties on, one inside the other, so they the one I will cinch down as tight as I possibly can, and then there'll be another one inside that I make a loop with, and that's what I tether my string with. But alternately, if you don't have miles and miles of these, you could put a self-tapping screw in each of your hoops and attach a zip tie or a string or something else to, you know, basically anchor your string that's going to go back and forth across. And then I come back the other way across in a zigzag pattern all the way down. So the entire thing is basically held with string. There's a lot of examples of this, you know, if my description isn't quite crystal clear, if you went on YouTube and just Googled string technique on low tunnels, you're going to get like 50 hits of people setting these things up. That's how I learned how to do it.
Does
Yeah.
the string cut into the plastic when it gets pretty windy?
I haven't had that problem yet. I've used a lot of different kinds of string, baling twine, like just the orange stuff that, not the hemp stuff, but like the plastic baling twine that you can buy in big rolls. I've also used, I don't know what gauge, but I've gotten some stuff from, any of the, fishing supply stores. They usually have pretty good, gauge string. You don't have to go, you know, like parachute cord thickness at all. And it has never been an issue with the plastic getting damaged. Eventually the string does break down if it's not UV resistant, like baling twine breaks down over time. But the trick is to get it really nice and tight, because then if you have this tight string going all the way down and then coming all the way back, you can actually pull the plastic up and that string will hold the plastic up in the air. So you can ventilate that way a lot easier than having to, you know, put clips all the way down. But it takes a little finessing to get it that tight. So we usually have 2 people, one on each side, tightening it, sort of like a shoelace. It's exactly like a shoelace, how it goes back and forth.
Yeah. And then a T-post on each end would be like the most secure anchor. But again, if you had a big rock, any number of things, piece of rebar, you could use that as well. And this is kind of another example. These are a little bit fancier hoops, and I've got another slide on some of these options, but you know, if you have that string set up right, you can just scrunch that plastic up and access your plants, which is really nice, and vent and get in there. So, again, the ventilation is very important with plastic, and you need a way to water if you've got plastic. Adjusting, weeding, thinning, thinking about like how many times you have to get in and out of these things. Ideally, you don't have to get in there at all, but if you've got a lot of weeds, you might have to. And then watching them with windstorms, rainstorms, and then in general, they can't handle much of a snow load at all. Carrie's shaking her head. She has experience with this. And you can always double it up, as I mentioned before. So the root maggot control, we've touched on this a few times, and it's kind of a big topic. If you don't know much about this, reach out to me and I will walk you through this and hold your hand if you need more clarification. But it's all about the life cycle of the pest. And the way these things are, they overwinter in the ground as pupa, as these little orange pellets. And then they hatch into flies and they look for something in the cabbage family to eat and turn into that turnip there. And those are the little baby larvae there at the base of the plant. So once they hatch out of the pupa stage, they're a fly, they look for their host and they lay their eggs at the base of the plant right there. And then they turn into the larva and start carving out their radishes. So it's really important that there's no pupa in the soil before you plant your crops and cover them with row cover. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose entirely. So I like to go 2 seasons before I plant something in the cabbage family again in that spot. And then I'm also really careful about sanitation, like is my tiller tossing dirt into the row next to it from where I had my radishes last year? I've had a lot of experience with these root maggots. They're tricky for sure. So you want to make sure there's no pupa in there, and then you plant your seeds or your transplants and cover them up and seal it up tight. And you don't want an inch of airspace because those flies are gonna make their way in there. And that's where Carrie was saying, like, she does not touch them all season long. I've had a harder time, my weeds kind of get out of hand, and so sometimes I just have to open it up and weed. And I always have root maggots, at least a few. So I think the more you can not mess with them, the better. Yeah, I saw a hand raise.
Do they have a predator?
A predator?
Yeah. Is there something that eats them that one needs to plant?
I mean, I'm sure all kinds of birds would eat them. You know, your typical insect eaters will eat them, but there can be so many of them. I don't know if you would have success with any kind of like introduced predation species, like a lady beetle or anything like that. Beetles are good predators in general, and there's some pretty interesting soil health practices that you can do to encourage beetles. That's maybe somewhat promising, but again, they're just so numerous that I think it'd be hard to eliminate them completely. Yeah.
Are those root maggots around in just native soil, or is this specifically something that's cultivated through crops and introduced seedlings?
Yeah, if you're growing, so my first year growing, I did not know about root maggots and I did not see a root maggot. I didn't have any trouble at all. I grew beautiful radishes. So I think if you're breaking brand new ground, and especially if you don't have neighbors real close that are growing these things, you might be able to get away with it, but they can fly miles. And so they'll find you that season, probably lay a few eggs and pupate, and then you've got a population of them. And they also, there are mustard family weeds that are native species, and they can be an alternate host for these. So in theory, you could have raw ground that's never been gardened and still have root maggots. Yeah. They're a tricky one. We could do a whole talk on this. So the last thing, the storage of this stuff, especially the agrabah, is a little bit delicate. So you want to be kind of careful with it. It absorbs water. So it's good to dry it out in the sun and then bunch it into garbage bags. It's the easiest way I've found to wrap it up and store it. You could also roll it up, you know, these people here have set up a little stand and they got a couple people and they're rolling it up nicely. And then it's easier to roll it all out in spraying, but the main thing is just storing that out of reach of rodents because they will get in there and lay nests and chew it all up and open it up in the spring. And you're like, oh, so that's the big thing. Doesn't have to be super clean. I've abused it quite a bit. Still stored it and reused it the next year. So a couple just like nifty little setups that you can buy. I don't know anybody locally who sells these things, but you can get them online. Modern Grower quick hoops and these never sink low cat tunnels. And you can go online and view some videos of how they work. They're obviously a little bit pricier than setting this all up yourself, but they save you some time. They're really easy and kind of cool, worth checking out.
Yeah.
And then, oh yeah,
Oh,
go
I was
for it.
just gonna say, I have the quick hoops. I demoed them for the first time last year. And I really love them. What I've been using them for now, I think I got like 50 in a packet, or maybe it was for a 50-foot roll. I can't remember. But I use them at the end of my hoop houses, or I'm sorry, low tunnels. So they basically are the tether. That's the way I tether them. So it's basically got a piece of metal that grabs whatever fabric or plastic you're using, and it's got a channel, and the metal sits in the channel, and then it is tensioned, so it's really tight, and you can get a very nice strong connection between the plastic and the hoop without any messing around with sandbags and all that sort of stuff. So if you're on a small scale and you're really interested in hoops, and you know, you maybe have 2 30-foot beds to cover or something, I would invest in these. I mean, they're pretty sturdy. They're gonna last years and years, and they definitely hold on to your material more efficiently than all these other setups. The only, you know, thing is, what scale are you at? And I haven't tried the NeverSink ones. The NeverSink low tunnels they use an elastic to kind of capture the plastic over each hoop. And again, I haven't tried that out yet, but it's also looks like a pretty good deal. I bought the quick hoops because I thought, well, maybe I'll figure out how to make them myself, but looking at them, I'm pretty sure I can't make them myself. So I'm just gonna buy some and use a couple in each low tunnel. So I think they're pretty cool though.
So one last resource I want to make sure everybody knows about is that the Natural Resource Conservation Service, the NRCS, they have a cost share on these systems now. It's brand new. It just started last year for the first time. Carrie took advantage of it. And so you can call them up and tell them that you want low tunnels, and they can come out and help you out with that. And I mean, it doesn't cover 100% of the cost necessarily, but they do cost share on it because you're solving a resource concern on your property. You've got, you know, suffering plants because of the cold or because of pests, and these low tunnels are designed to solve that. And so they have a program now. So it's worth reaching out to your office and telling them that you're interested in low tunnels. Again, they're like so much more accessible than a high tunnel, so much less commitment. They're easier, you know, you can do them on a small lot. You can do them in Anchorage where you can't have a high tunnel because of code.
You can pick them up and move them around your yard whenever you want.
You can move them around. Yeah. So definitely worth checking out the NRCS program.
So do you know if the NRCS program is about 50% of the cost if you went with the kit, or does it depend highly?
That's a good question. I didn't go completely with a kit. I just bought one kit and did the rest myself because I wanted to see how the kit was before I did it. But, I mean, honestly, of all the things I've done, bending the 1/2 inch conduit, was super simple. So highly recommend going that route. And if you do, you'll, the cost share last year anyway, it changes each year, far outpaced the expense for me anyway.
Yeah, they usually, price it, they consider the cost of the materials and they also consider your time installing it. So it's usually worth it, I mean, there's always hoops you have to jump through because you're working with the federal government. So there's paperwork and there may be some other things. I haven't gone through the whole process, but I've done it with high tunnel before and, so it's just, a consideration. Not like they just give you money, but it's definitely worthy of checking out.
Yeah, it's a new program, and if you guys are interested, it's good to share with them that this is something you're interested in. This is the kind of growing we do here in Alaska. We do have an NRCS representative on the Zoom from our Homer Field office, Jason Linderman. I don't know if you want to unmute, if you have anything to share that we haven't already about the program that would benefit this group.
Put him on the spot.
I know.
But yeah, if he doesn't come off, calling up your field office, for your region here is the best way to get started with that. So,
Have you used these with solid plastic, or pretty much you've always done some kind of vented material, either remay or slotted or hold or?
yeah, no, you can use just plain plastic. Carrie has experience with that.
Yeah, I started out just doing, some low tunnels with solid plastic, and now I would say 2/3 of my outdoor garden is covered with solid plastic low tunnels. So I just saw such advantage with the plants getting started at the beginning of the season and then even going into the fall. Now in mid-September, I cover, depending on the temperature, I cover all my late season crops in low tunnels inside my high tunnel. So then there's 2 layers of protection, frost protection. So, and all of that is with solid plastic. And then I typically put fabric on top of the crops in the beginning when they're getting started as well. So I've got, the plastic bubble and then the frost cloth on top of the plants inside the low tunnel. And it's a game changer. Like I could not, all the work that we go into to try and make something grow, and we're fighting against the temperatures and the wind and all this sort of stuff. You put these bubbles over things and stuff grows, I would say twice as well, at least twice as well. Try it.
Yeah.
And have you ever tried running string down the peak of each hoop so that you can apply tension at each end?
Yep. Yeah, I have tried that, and it does work if you get the string tight. And it's tricky. I mean, it's all tricky. I have a lot of hoops that cover 2 30-foot beds and 30-inch beds, sorry, 2 30 beds and the pathway in between. And for those ones, because the span is a lot wider, I did start out using that string. I've found that if I can get the plastic itself tensioned well enough, it's not necessary to use that string. And since I move these low tunnels around a lot, the string can be a real pain in the neck. But on a smaller scale, I would definitely recommend that, because what the trick is to get something to help the rain shed off from the center point and not pool up on your plastic. So that's the challenge. I would, go ahead.
Oh, just a couple resources here. So if you want to take a picture or screenshot, I'll send these out with the recording as well, and anybody here who might want the recording, I can get your email and we can send it to you as well. But yeah, there's lots of good like tutorials and instructions on how to set these up online, and then, you know, you can buy those quick hoops and things from these suppliers. And then Heidi Rader has a great video that's for Alaska on YouTube as well. You can just search in YouTube Heidi Rader low tunnels and it'll pop up. That's a pretty good one as well. And that's all we've got. I'll leave that one up for a second. So any other questions?
There was a question a little bit earlier in the chat about slugs. And what about slug protection with these things? I mean, you've got ventilation happening too. So I guess I would add to that question, you know, what about slugs? And also, if we're protecting from the root maggots, we want to kind of keep them sealed up tight. Then how does the ventilation thing work? And checking on your drip tank too.
Carrie, what's your experience with slugs with row cover?
Slugs are a reality. And there's I buy Sluggo in 50-pound bags now and apply every week and a half to 2 weeks. And that's my way of dealing with slugs. And as far as the whole issue of the root maggots and the fabric being over the top of the crop the whole time, I mean, I take it up obviously to harvest radishes and salad turnips. It's just that, you know, throughout the duration of the time, it needs to be attached to the ground in some way that a fly can't get underneath it. So that's where either a piece of some sort of heavy material that tethers that entire edge down is the trick I use now, because otherwise it just blows away.
Yeah, and then on the ventilation part, pretty much with root maggots, we're just talking about the row cut or the agribon or remay, the spun woven stuff. So you're not worried about ventilation in that case. I wouldn't recommend using plastic just for root maggots because you have to vent the plastic.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have 100-foot rows of a low growing berry crop that I'm thinking about doing low tunnels on. Can I run a low tunnel the entire length of that in a windy area with perforated, or do I use the clear plastic? And it'll hold up for that whole distance? Or do I have to break it into 2 rows?
I mean, I think it would be easier to tether 2 50-foot sections than it would be to tether a 100-foot long span. But if I were doing a 100-foot long span, and especially since it's a crop like a berry, you might even consider running a piece of conduit down the top. So if you put, you know, a 10-foot piece of conduit, a hoop at one, you know, so you do 3 hoops per 10-foot piece or something like that. And then, so then you'd have a top piece that's solid, that's rigid all the way along. That's what we do with the hoop houses, and it works pretty well. So if it's something you're going to leave in place for, you know, years over a berry crop, that would be worth the time to and resources to invest that top piece. And then doing the string back and forth definitely would help with the wind and the plastic. And I think I would try the perforated plastic for that, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Still obsessing over hoops. So has anybody tried like a 60-degree to make something like a Gothic arch, to get back to Carrie's emphasis on drainage?
Yeah, so those double row ones that I was talking about, they look like is it an ellipse? I should know this, being a journalist, but not a colon, but an ellipse that kind of has a bend at the very top. and a kink at the top so that it has a top piece that aids with drainage. And they work pretty well, especially given the fact that they're so wide. With the hoops that just are 30 inches wide and just covering a single bed, you don't really need that Gothic arch, because they're so narrow.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.